If you're even slightly interested in going to law school, you definitely want to hear this report so that you know what you're possibly getting yourself into. Because the American Bar Association recently released a report about student debt loads for recent law grads, at least those people who graduated within the last 10 years. The report has some jarring details that should serve as a warning for those who are wanting to go to law school potentially. But before we get into that, if you're new to the channel, my name is Jack Duffley, and I'm a 23-year-old real estate investor and soon-to-be attorney. I actually graduated just a couple months ago, and will be taking the bar exam in just 2 weeks from today. But I cover a variety of topics as they relate to investing and personal finance, and I do have a lot of law school content as well, and certainly will be talking more about my law career as I get into it over this next year. So if that content sounds interesting to you, definitely have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. Now, about this report by the ABA, it was specifically a survey conducted of just about 1,000 newer lawyers, and they define that as people who recently graduated law school within the last 10 years. So this certainly is not a huge study, so take it with a grain of salt, but this sample should be a decent representation of what's going on in the legal field. This report asked those people a variety of questions about their student debt load, as well as what they were actually doing with their careers since they had graduated. And rather unsurprisingly, it found that the vast majority of people said that they had taken out loans to graduate from law school. In fact, 95% of these respondents said that they had some sort of student loans by the time they finished school. And also of note, this was not because they had massive burdens coming out of undergrad on the aggregate. In fact, the average loan balance out of undergrad for these people was about $17,000, with the median being $4,000 per person. And by the time they finished law school, that average debt had ballooned to over $160,000. So the top half of graduates of law school have, on average, $160,000 in debt. At least that was from the last 10 years. And you can take a look at the percentiles based on the amount of student debt, that being the amount of student loans at graduation. So this is as soon as they graduate law school. You're coming out with $160,000 if you're in the 50th percentile. If you're in the 99th percentile, you are blessed with over $380,000 in debt. So that's obviously a freak occurrence if we're looking at this sample, but you could see that it's a lot of money, no matter which way you spin it. $160,000, that is a lot of money. Doesn't really matter how much you're making. That is not something to scoff at. And even the bottom 10% of debt holders were looking at $65,000 or so in aggregate student loan balance by the time they graduated. That itself is a lot, and that's near the very bottom of this percentile breakdown. But that's not very surprising. Law school is expensive for just about everyone, and if law school isn't expensive, then undergrad's probably expensive, because college is expensive. Thank you, America. But this isn't to say that you have to graduate law school with a ton of debt. If you play your cards right and with a little bit of luck, of course, based on the current competition that you have going into law school, you can actually get something like a full ride or a large scholarship to law school. That's something I was able to do. I was able to get a full ride, and I've broken that down on this channel before. If you're looking to do something similar, if you're interested in law school, I'll go ahead and link that video in the description below. I highly recommend you check it out. But just a quick disclaimer to that, it's unlikely that you're going to get a full ride from certain schools, especially top-tier law schools, and those are going to be very expensive, so that could potentially pull this average up. But even if you get a hefty scholarship, law school can still be very, very expensive, since the sticker price is often super high, and even if you get half off of that, you're still left with a pretty hefty bill, and these loan numbers certainly make that seem like it's the case. But the most startling statistics is less so the amount of debt coming out of school, but rather the amount of people who have actually seen their balances increase since they graduated. And this is, again, of a population of people who graduated law school within the last 10 years. In fact, 40% of the people surveyed reported that they had a higher balance as opposed to when they graduated. 40%, and about 50% had either the same or a higher balance. That is crazy, especially since lawyers make good money, generally speaking. Now, not every lawyer is going to make a huge amount of money, but many lawyers do, and you'd expect to see probably more than half at least have a lower balance since the time they graduated. That is an insane stat, if you ask me. And the debt burden has affected people's decisions as well. Here's a list of some of the responses that people said had happened to them because of their debt burden. You can see here 55 or about 56% say they postponed their decision to buy a house, and 48% they postponed their decision to have children because of this. Another said that they actually chose a different career path than originally expected despite all this debt. So what I'm really getting at here is that law school is not a guaranteed golden ticket. Yes, you can make a lot out of the degree. You can certainly make a lot lot of money with a degree if things fall in your favor, at least generally speaking. But the fact that a third of respondents here picked a completely different career is more alarming because the amount of debt that these people are taking on to do something like a law path. That doesn't mean that the law degree doesn't help them in any way. I'm sure they met a lot of good connections at law school, probably got some better analytical skills that could help them in another career, but still, that's a lot of money to pay to not even do the career that you're trying to get licensed for when you go to law school, when, at least for most people, that's what they're trying to do when they go to law school. And on a similar note, about a third of respondents said that they picked a job for the money rather than something that they really wanted, which I think definitely makes sense given the amount of debt here. You're probably going to be focusing on that. That is maybe your number one burden coming out of school for a lot of people, especially if you're up there in the 200 grand range. That's a ton of debt. You're looking at something like $2,000 per month probably in payments. So that is nothing that you can just kind of ignore or push under the rug. And if you do, you're going to see your balance increase like half of the respondents here. Now you might be thinking, oh, Jack, don't you worry about the lawyers. They're all making fat stacks. They're going to be able to pay off all this debt in a jiffy. No worries about that. Now, it's definitely true. At least some students will get pretty high-paying jobs out of law school and some very high-paying law jobs that will be able to quickly smash through all of that debt, even with rather reckless financial practices elsewhere. But not every lawyer makes north of 100 grand, especially out of school. Oftentimes, the starting salary might be something closer to 60 grand or 70 grand. There's no guarantee that you're going to be raking in tons and tons of cash. And don't get me wrong, 70 grand is a very respectable salary, especially in certain markets where housing costs aren't super high. But you have to pay for these student loans, and if that's, say, 2 to 3 grand per month, that's a lot of money right there that you're going to have to pay. And then you have your housing expenses and any other expenses that you have to live. So you're going to have to make some serious sacrifices. And you probably just went through maybe 5 to 6 or 7 years of sacrifices as you went through school. At least you should have been if you're trying to lower your debt burden coming out of school. So even though your salary might be much higher than the average person in the US, your debt burden is also much higher. So your monthly payments are also much higher, and your quality of life might not necessarily be much higher. And it might take many years to actually get through this burden if you're actually paying it down, which apparently a lot of people aren't, which is rather shocking. This also assumes that you can land a legal job, since apparently a third of people decided to go to a different career, potentially because of difficulties in the job market, since there's definitely no guarantee out of law school that you will get a job, especially right now during rather strange times in pretty much every market, not just the legal market. It's no guarantee that you'll get a job out of law school, so you have to be very careful there too. When you're taking on this sort of debt burden, you are taking on a lot of risk, and you got to try to find a way to make that risk pay off, or find ways to mitigate that risk at least. So if you're thinking about law school, weigh the risks carefully. Don't assume that you're going to make 200 grand out of law school at some giant law firm. There's no guarantee that you're going to do that. Make sure you're actually doing it for a reason, since a lot of people don't even end up in a legal career despite having wanted to go to one. Instead, they picked a different path. Be sure that you're picking this route, this very expensive route for many people. Be sure you're picking it for a reason, and that you have some sort of plan that is reasonably likely to actually be successful. It's a lot of time, energy, and money, and even if you get a full ride to law school, you have the opportunity cost of losing years of salary that you could have been making rather than going to school. A lot of financial considerations to make when you're actually making this decision. Relatively high earners may still have very substantial burdens that they might not even be meeting. Definitely realize that the student debt crisis is not unique to undergrads. It applies to many professions, if not all professions, that have these expensive schools to go through in order to actually try and be a part of this career. Whatever the case, please tread carefully. But that's all I've got for today. If you like this video, please like it, since that would help the channel out a lot. And if you have any questions about law school or the legal market and the legal hiring process, then definitely let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to talk more about that. Or you can check out my other videos on the channel. And if you like this sort of content, be sure to subscribe, since I put out new videos every single week. And check out the free goodies in the description below. I got some affiliate links down there that you can get some free stocks with Webull and Robinhood, for example, and you don't even have to use the accounts after that, but you might as well get your free stocks while the money is there. There's also some other stuff down there. Definitely would appreciate it if you check it out. But until next time, take care.